Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was Betrayed and Planned It All, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Takezawa opened his eyes, seeing the ceiling above him. It took a moment for him to squeeze his arm muscles and truly start waking up. As he clenched his hands together, he noticed a crack in one of the beams above him. "I'll need to replace that," he said, straining to sit up for a moment. Once in a seated position, he reached his arms upward, popping several bones in his back, arm, and end. His arms then fell back by his side. He sighed. Another day, another page to turn, he mumbled as he uncovered himself and stood up. He bent down and grabbed his toes, holding them for a full moment. He straightened and walked over to the door of his small shack. There was nearly nothing in his little home. Nothing but a mat and blanket. Not even interior walls or a real floor. One of the exterior walls was made of wood, something Takezawa knew to be a giant root. Grass and roots made up the ground. He pushed open the covering that made his door aside and stepped into the sunlight. It took his green eyes a second to react and adjust to the rays of the sun. The sound of insects greeted him, letting him relax in the relative silence of nature. He looked to the root that made up a wall of his home and followed it. He lost track of it every once in a while among the other trees, but he would always go back to where he lost it and keep tracing its path. This was his morning ritual, and he wouldn't stop until he reached the end. And the end he found at the base of a single tree. It amused him how winding the route was, only to end up at the tree not even 20 feet from the front of his tiny shelter. It was an immense tree, stretching what he knew to be just shy of 4 kilometers. 3 and 9,371 10,000ths kilometers was what he knew to be more exact. 3,937 and 1/10 meters, his mind ran through the conversion. A piece of the bark on that tree rippled, leaves across the thousands of branches rustled. A vine stretched down from the top of the tree, a bulb at the end. It moved to him and simply poked him in the forehead. "Good morning. How was the night in my absence?" Takezawa asked. A small pulse of energy went through the vine and into his head, prompting him to snicker. "I'm glad that you enjoyed the night air, my friend. So, anything important happening out there?" Another pulse. "So a woman is walking in this direction. It has been a long time since we had a visitor. I wonder what her intentions are. Do you think they are pleasant?" A pulse. "She might look pleasant, but that wasn't what I meant," he said with a smile. "I meant her intentions." Pulse. "Perhaps. I shall do my duty if she is hostile, I shall watch her go if she simply passes by, and I shall be a proper and polite host should she stop. However, there is that other detail. I'll handle it when the problem arises. For now, it has been oh so long since I wielded a sword. Would you grace me with a new one to replace my old one? I shall put a fire on for coffee and tea." The vines moved away as Takezawa went to gather wood and his own supply of materials for making drinks and meals over a fire. Vines gathered around the first, forming a thin hand. The hand of vines dipped into the soil and grabbed a small handful of it. The hand closed around the soil and glowed for several minutes. As it did this, another vine dug into the ground and burrowed deep. Takezawa returned after nearly 20 minutes and built a small fire. Once it was done, the vines held something out to him. The vine that had burrowed into the earth held out a uniquely engraved silver blade. The thin and spindly hand held a pure and black gem. A thin vine twisted and grew around the blade and jeweled to form a handle that became thin and smooth before the vines became unconnected. Takezawa took the sword from the gentle vines and swung the blade through the air a few times. It is as light and beautiful as it is elegant and graceful. It has much finesse. The times I have had to improvise with brute force makes me slightly unaccustomed to the grace, but I shall make true use of it all the same. He sat down and placed the sword beside him before taking the wood and organized it within a circle of stones. Once lit, he set up a metal hook from which he hung a pot filled with water. "Would you like tea or coffee?" The hand rearranged a few things in a line for him. "Blueberry tea it is. I shall have it ready momentarily." It was another half hour before the water had boiled, the tea was steeped, and the proper amount of sugar and honey had been added. Takezawa held the cup out, letting the vines take the cup and wrap around it. They dipped themselves into the cup and rippled. I'm glad you enjoy it, he chuckled out. However, I believe our guest is here. The vines rippled, absorbed the tea rapidly, lowered the cup, and then rose to disappear among the branches. Takezawa waited a few seconds before seeing a young woman appear from behind a tree. She wore a dark cloak that hid much of her features as she got closer. Once she stood next to him, she stopped. Would it be all right if I join you? She asked in a soft voice. Of course not, he said, gesturing to the ground across the fire from him. She sat down with her legs crossed and undid her cloak. Taking it off revealed a young woman in her late teens with a slender physique and soft, white skin, and very delicate facial features that showed naivety yet knowing, and elegance. Her hair was finely textured, nearly golden, and obviously very long, held in a large bundle at the back of her head. She reached behind her and let her hair loose. It was as long as Takezawa guessed, sweeping behind her and pulling on the ground. The last thing of note was her thinly sea eyebrows. She herself took note of him. Green eyes, dark and wavy hair to his broad shoulders, and, from what she could tell, he would be a notable amount taller than her. Welcome to my very humble abode, Takezawa said. Would you like tea or coffee? She looked at him a moment. Coffee please. Of course. He moved to make her drink. So what brings a princess way out here? She gave him a questioning glance. The eyebrows. Her cheeks turned slightly red. Of course. Spend as much time alone as I do and you often forget some things. I'm traveling to a neighboring country. I'm acting as a diplomat of sorts. I'm sure you are familiar with the wars. I'm being sent to secure a peace treaty to strengthen our position in the war. Though I personally wish the whole damn thing was over. She covered her mouth slightly. Realizing why, Takezawa laughed. You need not watch your language in my presence. To be honest, I was not concerned with your opinion. I was concerned about where we are. Because we are on sacred ground. Do not worry. She doesn't care a single iota about your wars, and even lesser about your choice of words. Oh, I was just. No, it's fine. Do not worry. There was a pause. Thank you. So, what about you? Why are you all the way out here? Living here, at the trunk of the no less. I mean, you do know what this is, don't you? She asked. I was scared to speak wrong here, but you even refer to the great tree as a she. Of course I know. The great Shinju, bearer of the legendary forbidden fruit that blooms once every millennium. But you did ask another question. It is a simple enough question, but with no simple answer. It is true, we sit in the shadow of the Shinju, but I am not worried. Many years ago I laid S on her roots. Watching me merely ask that my goodbye be delivered, rather than beg to her that she save my life, touched something in her. She spared me, allowing me to send my final goodbye to my mother. It came with no small price, yet one I was more than happy to pay. So I sit here and watch. I do what she is little prepared to do herself. I scare off what the superstition, as correct as some might be, will not. That is quite something. I have never heard of such an event. That's because the only one for her to ever do that for has never left and is sitting across from you. Takezawa said, passing her a now ready cup of coffee. He then moved a piece of metal over the fire and began preparing himself a meal, the woman saying she had eaten recently. All others to have S near her roots have not been so accepting of death as I was. They begged for their lives for their own sake. I begged for the sake of someone else's peace. For that, opened her very roots and saved my life. Right, well, with its bloom coming soon, I can imagine that you might be excited, she said. She then took a sip of the drink and gave a very pleased expression. And why would you say that? Well, no one alive has ever seen the bloom for reasons you of all people should know. And even then, few have seen it at all in history. Old texts say it is an impressive and wondrous event to see. He chuckled. Oh, I understand now. Sometimes I myself forget. Tell me, how old would you wager me to be? She stared a moment and thought hard. Around my age, if not, then a little older. I myself was born almost 20 years ago, so I hope that gives you some idea of my judgment. His chuckling turned to outright laughter that took nearly a full minute to stop. I had, in fact, Guessed you were in your late teens, and you made a good guess. Before the Shinju saved me, it was the day after I became 20 years old. But since that day, I have seen the bloom 3 times. This upcoming one shall make 4. Her shock dropped her jaw. You have survived that long. How? He gestured to the massive tree and gave her a look. She blushed again. Oh, I guess that should have been obvious. So, I've heard of you before. 2 millennium ago a man brought armies to this place, coming to claim the fruit. The few who survived that day in history claimed that the Shinju released a demon from its roots, like war and death incarnated into a being that is the army. It was the first time anyone tried something like that due to the superstition, and it's why so few ever even come to this place anymore. She paused, thinking of a way to change the subject. Noticing her attempt and nervousness, he helped her out with a smile. How about, for the moment, we exchange names? I have not yet had the pleasure of knowing yours. Of course. My name is Kaguya. Kaguya Hojo, she said, eager and grateful for the turn of conversation. Takezawa smiled. Well met, Kaguya. My name is Takezawa. He paused briefly as if trying to remember something. It's been so long, it took me a moment to actually remember my full name. My name is Takezawa Utsuchuki. Break. Takezawa placed the cups and pot in a small basin of water as Kaguya stood up, nearly ready to continue on her journey now that she was somewhat rested. Kaguya looked up to the sky, realizing that while they had been conversing, nearly an hour had passed. Surprised as she was, she waited for Takezawa to turn towards her again and then gave a slight bow. I must thank you for the drink and conversation. It was a wonderful rest compared to the few days I've been walking. I'm assuming you are often walking that long, considering you don't have a pack with anything to help you rest. Takezawa commented on her lack of provisions. On trips across a desert, I would take food and water. But considering this trip being through plenty of forests and towns, it's easy enough to get those things. As for sleep, me and my siblings have been trained from a young age to forego sleep for days or even weeks. It's not exactly pleasant, and rest is always welcome, but it allows for things to be done faster. I suppose. But you seem to be particularly worn out. You say you have been traveling for some time. I offer you the chance to sleep here under my watch. I have an extra sleeping mat and blanket. You may rest here. I should be going, but thank you. Kaguya said, though her eyes were obviously heavy. Trained though you may be, you said yourself that rest is always welcome and you are obviously tired. All due respect to your station and abilities, I would insist you not turn down my hospitality. Takezawa said with a soft yet firm tone. She gave him a look and was about to protest but decided against it. I might not like his tone, but his hospitality has been a nice change of pace and his argument holds merit. Fine. I'll take you up on that offer. Kaguya said. Break. Takezawa stood on the end of a vine, the night shining around him and alive with nightlife. He looked down at his small hut, knowing his guest was still asleep inside. There was a pulse through the vine. You don't have extra blankets or sleeping mats. The pulse reminded. No, I don't. But if I had told her I was giving up my only ones, she would have refused. Not only did I need her to stay so I could see about these ones, she's rather cute when she's sleeping. The vine shook and sent multiple pulses. Takezawa was nonplussed by the shaking. Laugh all you please. I was stating a simple fact. And don't mock me, old friend. It's been a long time since I made the acquaintance of another human being. He then paused to let out a sigh. Pulses went off through the vine. Now, don't let your dirty mind run away with you. Such teasing, I have to wonder if perhaps you have ulterior motive for such thoughts. Is the great Shinju jealous of my affection? Takezawa said in a teasing tone. The vine wreathed and nearly threw him off. You started it, old friend, he said, struggling to maintain balance and snickering at the tree's reaction. There was a final pulse as the vine fell still. Oh, so then, it's time once again to don the visage of the monster of the roots. He pulled his new sword off his back. If you would, old friend. The vine he was standing on branched out, began twisting around him. Bark formed over his sea in the appearance of a thick rib cage and around legs, thin roots wrapping around his joints to allow continued movement but some protection. Vines formed thick layers around his limbs but left his joints alone to provide flexible but more than adequate protection. More bark formed along his back in the same pattern as his sea, jagged pieces of the wood forming a spinal column that moved up to the base of the N and down to the pelvic region. As each section formed, they turned black and deathly. Finally, vines and roots formed together to complete the deathly appearance of a skull over his head with hollow and darkened eye sockets. Small buds formed, blooming into small red roses in place of the eyes. Now shall the servant of the Shinju bring death to those who threaten the peace of this ground. Takezawa said before the vine dropped him. He landed on a large root, the bark rippling around him as he sank within. His form moved through the tree, moving through the forest and finding those he sought. And then he found them. 7 of them, hiding near his home. So what about that guy who she's been talking to? Any of you know where he is? One the men asked in a gruff voice. He disappeared about an hour ago, but he was keeping watch before that, so we really don't know, another said. What is up with this guy? He lives at the base of the great tree and then tells the princes of the Hojo clan to sleep in his home. The first asked. I don't know. You think this guy could be? You think he could actually be the demon of the Shinju? The monster it spat out in legend to defend its fruit. A third asked in a wheezing voice. Impossible. A hulking man responded. It's a legend and nothing more. Yeah, maybe so. The first interrupted. But either way he's an obstacle in the way of our target. That's something I wanted to talk with you about, boss. A woman spoke up. Are we sure we want to get involved with this? If it's ever traced back to us Kaguya, we are S. I know that Sakuya, but we don't have a choice. If she marries and connects our clans through B, our clan will be overtaken by those dogs. If she is withdrawn, we will not have their support in the war. But if she is K, we can twist the tragedy to keep our clans separated and still gain their support. I have heard your reasoning and found your reasoning unsatisfactory. Takezawa said through the roots, his voice echoing. From my observation, you would betray your word for your clan. Noble as such an intention may be, I shall not allow you to K this woman. She is a guest of this forest, but from your words, you intended to K her here. You shall turn back and return to your home, or I shall K you. Come out. Don't be a coward, the leader shouted. A nearby root opened on a flurry of vines allowing Takezawa to step forth. You dare insult the validity of my character. Such insolence, it is only by the wishes of my mistress that I don't stain the ground with your B outright. Tell me who you are, the leader said, stepping forward. I am the one you would most notably know by the lure of demon of the Shinju. You know, the one who destroyed an entire army. Takezawa said. That's a myth, nothing more, the hulking brute said, a heavy mace over his shoulder. Takezawa waved his hand and roots sprouted from the dirt, the ground open. The roots wrapped the man's legs as he started to panic, hands raised ready to use the mace on the roots. Suddenly his arms were off. Though Takezawa had not seemed to move, his blade was now dripping B. Am I still a myth to you now? He asked. I shall give you all one last chance, take your broken friend and return home. If you do not, I will end your pathetic lives. Break. Kaguya stepped through the door, pushing her wild hair out of the way of her eye. Her eyes showed she was still tired and her hair was knotted, tangled, and all over. As she wiped the sleep from her eyes she was greeted with a sight she didn't at first understand. I suggest you wake yourself up, my friend. We have a guest, Takezawa said, pushing the leader of last night's group into the dirt at Kaguya's feet. Kaguya took a moment to register what was happening as she looked down at the man. Zetsu, she asked. So I take it you know this man? Takezawa asked. Why yes, he's my brother, Zetsu Hojo. Takezawa pulled his sword off his back and held it out to her. Then his life is in your hands. He and a group of people were here to K you. From what I beat out of them, they had been following you in the hopes that once you crossed certain borders they could K you. You were always against my marriage into the other clan, but you knew I had no choice. Yet you would go this far. Why brother? Kaguya asked. Zetsu looked up at her, heavily beaten. He spat at her feet, be among the spit. Because you didn't even resist. You wouldn't even try to resist the marriage into that clan of animals. Beasts. I had to make sure the alliance would be secure without RB mixing with them. I love you dear sister, but you must understand. Kaguya looked over at Takezawa and then to Zetsu with loving eyes. I do, my brother. I do. But you must also understand that I didn't object because I must save our clan. I must protect the people I care for, she said before taking the sword from Takezawa. She raised it into the air, her hand shaking as she did. Then she brought it down. Zetsu looked at the ground where the sword was buried in the ground and then looked back up to Kaguya, tears streaming from her eyes. Why? You will leave this place. I can assume as to who it is that tried to help you with this. Take their bee and bury them where they will never be found. And then, you leave. You do not return to the clan. You never return to this place. Your life belongs to me and I'm releasing it. Never let me see you again. She then helped her brother stand and stood there to watch as he left. And the moment he was out of sight, she collapsed and broke down. It was only several minutes after her crying began that she realized she was crying into a shoulder. Takezawa had caught her when she collapsed, and she was grateful for that. Thank you, Kaguya said as her crying ebbed. Within the clans isn't uncommon. Siblings, even parents against their children, but I never expected my brother to do so. But I understand his reasons. And now I've banished him from the clan. He is no longer a Hojo. That was the hardest thing I have ever done, she sobbed. Takezawa simply let her cry and patted her back. It might have been easier to kill him, but you have reaffirmed my thoughts about your character. It is often harder to lay down your blade than to strike with it. I know, but it hurts, no matter what choice is made. Yes, so for now, think about what you gain from such a price. Kaguya finally sat back and looked at him. I'm sorry this all fell onto your lap. Politics of the warring clans to collide right into you. Think nothing of it. My guest is safe, and I am therefore happy. She thanked him and stood up. Sometimes, I truly wish this whole damn war was over. Break. Why do I feel a gap in you? The tree asked within his mind. Because I feel a gap myself. Takezawa said, watching the dot that was Kaguya far in the distance. She is an interesting person and it has been so long since I have felt that. She wants the war to be over, and for some reason, her sadness touches my heart. This world has been plagued by wars since before I came to this place. Something about her pain has sparked my interest in the world outside these woods. You wish to rejoin the world. I wish to help her. She says she is doing this of her own choice to protect her family, but the pain in her eyes is the spark that ignites my own burning pain from those days. It's not so much that I want to rejoin the world, but that I want to see it saved. I can't truly explain why, other than that she has wakened something within me. He paused in thought for several minutes. My oldest friend, you who I have protected for so long, I must ask a question. If I were to ask that you release me from my bond and allow me to give Kaguya the fruit that will sprout in 2 years' time, what would be your reply? I will answer your question with a question or two of my own. What makes you think she could even handle the fruit? I sense her heart to be pure. Her desire to end the wars is fascinating. But you are wondering if her mind could handle it. If it would begin to threaten her sanity, I would be her anchor to reality. And what if I told you that giving her the fruit would only bring you misery? I'm not sure. I know I have only known her for all of a few hours, but she has somehow won over my heart. I have endured worse than misery throughout my life. I could survive it. I fear even this misery would overwhelm you. But if that is what you choose, I will not stop you, my friend. Go to her, and keep her close. But return in 2 years on the day of the blossoming. On that day, I shall judge your resolve and her own heart. Then I shall decide. But I must ask another question. Why not take the fruit yourself? Because I learned long ago, on the day of my death, that I don't have that strength of will necessary to even touch the fruit. Break. The eyes opened and looked at him with beauty as his dreams became reality. They then blinked before turning red with a rippling effect and several tomes spinning in circles. The face he looked at was so beautiful yet it suddenly caught fire and melted, leaving only the hollow skeleton. Through the eye sockets he saw glassy eyes. He sank into the sockets and found his own face resting beneath the and charred bone, looking back at him with hollow green eyes devoid of emotion. They sprouted sadness and then hatred before becoming grim and The face that became his on then twisted and contorted until he was looking at the small pod he knew so well. That pod swelled and grew before splitting open to reveal a fruit. From that fruit stretched a face that morphed into his own once again. It screamed in pain before igniting into flames, burning until all that remained was a skeleton, clean and stainless. The fire then formed a hand and took the skull and held it out to him. I warned you of the hatred and pain. Know forever that your noble heart and wondrous intentions will forever have my love and admiration. And one day, once your suffering is over, you will return to my roots. Takezawa opened his eyes, the memories of the disturbing dream he had just witnessed already fading as dreams tended to do. And his eyes moved, looking around before looking straight up into the eyes he had spent 3 years coming to say he loved. Long after their marriage, he still loved those eyes. Kaguya's eyes. And now that the wars and finally ended, the world coming together under her guiding hand, he could finally look into them every morning. Good morning, my prince of the world, she said, looking into his still dreary eyes. I have wondrous news for you, my darling. He smiled. A hand moved to her cheek before moving to the horns sticking out of her hair. He had to say they were rather cute in his mind. With all that has happened, my rabbit goddess Kaguya Utsuchuki, any wondrous news is mere icing on the cake. She grabbed his hand and moved it downward, all the way to her belly where she placed the flat of his hand. It took Takezawa a moment to realize the significance of this. He looked up into her eyes as they streamed tears of joy. She smiled in glee. Takezawa, you're going to be a FA. Her words and happiness were forever see off as fire exploded around them. Break. Kaguya stood there, still not changed out of her hardly there burned robe. Though she had suffered serious burns in the explosion, the fact she had survived it allowed those burns to heal at a rapid pace. It had been several hours since the explosion and she stood in the rain, oblivious to most everything around her. And then an object was brought before her. My lady, we were able to apprehend the man who planted the explosives, a guard said, shoving Zetsu to his knees before her. That object, her brother, became the object of her sadness. Why would you do this? Her brother sneered. We each tried to help our clan once. You may have banished me from it, but I have not forgotten. You then left your duty behind for that man who protected the Shinju. You betrayed your clan for power. The first clan you brought to heel before you was the Hojo clan. Your own family. Because I had to show that I would not favor them as I ended the wars. I had to separate myself from them. But you him. Takezawa, my husband. If it's any consolation, princess, I meant to K you both. The back of Kaguya's hand then made contact with Zetsu's face with blinding speed. His cheek split open with the very force behind it. Take this man away. Torture him brutally, but the man who K him will face my wrath. I shall call for him when I'm ready. As Zetsu was taken away, another guard, one of the few who had been Kaguya's friend before she ended the wars, walked up behind her and put a hand on her shoulder. Takezawa's body has not been found. There is still a chance that. Kaguya waved a hand, see her off. The heat. I felt the flames and I know that no mere human being could have survived that. I barely did. He's gone. He's gone. Just leave me alone. And within a minute, she had her wish. She was alone. She chose that moment to shout to the sky in agony, both mentally and physically. Hatred and sadness and grief finally came to a spearhead as she yelled. Her horns grew sharper and more prominent. And then a thin line split her forehead. A dream. A dream. All I want is a dream where I have him back. She screamed in her mind. The split in her face stretched, a simple white mass forming in the hole, causing immense pain. And then that mass turned into a sphere that quickly stained red with a rippling effect. Black marks burned into the newly formed eye along the ripples until there were 3 on each line. The screaming suddenly subsided as she collapsed. She looked down at the ground where a puddle was forming in the rain. And what she could see of that reflection terrified her as the veins surrounding her eyes bulged from her face. Break. Kaguya sat on a throne and waved a hand, having her brother brought before her. His face was hideously deformed from the tea and his body was covered in flays and burns. He shuddered and screamed at the pain of being thrown to the hard stone floor. K me already. Zetsu groaned, finally tired of the pain. Oh, I will, Kaguya said with a smirk. But only in the most agonizing way possible. She held a hand out to high and his skin began to smoke. What was left of his fingernails tried clawing at his skin as the pain quickly burned into him. His skin started to burn as his F started to rend itself from his body, falling to the floor and quickly becoming a black mass. It was not long till Tat was all that remained. A black liquid puddle. Satisfied with her work, Kaguya bit into a fruit and looked at the large yellow seed inside. She plucked the pit from its prison and then tossed it into the black mass. Though her brother was S and his actual mind was gone, she could make use of him. She held out her hand again, focusing intently on what she was now doing. Rise, Zetsu. It's time for you to serve a purpose, she said as the mass began to take form, the yellow pit melting, splitting, and forming two perfect circles. Soon, a black creature with two yellow eyes was standing before her. What purpose would you have me serve, mother? Break. The years passed and Kaguya was eventually sealed by her sons, each taking a new task in life with their mother defeated. More years passed and eventually Hagoromo Utsutsuki came closer to death, though some felt he was not close enough. Skull passed between two trees and moved closer. He lifted his blade, ready to strike when the sage's voice called out. It's not polite to slink in the shadows, Hagoromo said. Skull stepped out from his hiding place and stepped forward till he stood in front of the sage. You have something I need, his dark synthetic voice said. And what would that be? The Juubi. I need it. What use could you possibly have for such a creature? Hagoromo asked, opening his eyes to look up at Skull from his seated position. I lost someone not very long ago, Skull said, rubbing his hand along the skull over his head. I want to be reunited with her. What makes you think that such a creature could reunite the two of you? A friend of mine, named Zetsu, knows of its abilities. The infinite Tsukuyomi. It will be able to reunite me with the woman I love. If you think such a jutsu will bring someone back to life for you, you are sorely mistaken. Skull lifted his blade again. We shall see, old man. Skull rushed in, his blade whistling through the air towards Hagoromo's head. Hagoromo was up in an instant, flipping backwards through the air. Pretty spry for an old man, Skull shouted as he went after the sage. A black sphere went flying at him, but he simply wrapped his hand around the truth-seeking ball and shattered the sphere, much to Hagoromo's surprise. Rather than freaking out, the sage moved a sphere to his hand that quickly took the form of a double helix-shaped sword. The sword of Nunoboko, Skull muttered with a grin. Finally some fun. Break. Too many are still alive, Zetsu said. There is no way we can properly shape events with so many of both clans still alive. It's bad enough that those, Uzumaki, split off so long ago, but we need to contain what we can. I know, Zetsu, Skull said, his arms folded as he watched Madara and Hashirama shake hands before the gates of the village they had built. What do you suggest? Not everyone was happy about all the destruction caused by the wars. Play on the guilt. I think I know what you mean. With the so-called Badlands out to the west, I should be able to convince some of these sentimental fools to return in an attempt to right their sins. I'll see what I can do. What will you be doing in the meantime? I'm going to work on Madara. He can't run around outside our influence or we'll start losing ground. Break. Sasuke continued walking as he had for the past couple of days after his exile, knowing the moment he had arrived exactly why these were the Badlands of the world. He was used to a lack of sleep, but even this was pushing it as his Susanoo redirected yet another bolt of lightning. The sandstorm was brutal, grains of dust and sand slipping through even his ethereal protection. He shielded his eyes as another gust blew sand into his face. It was becoming hard to breathe, even with the wet cloths over his mouth and nose. His eyes became heavier, his body urging him to give in to sleep. His chakra felt no strains so far, which he was grateful for, but even so, his eyes hurt from the continued activation of his Susanoo. Another strike of lightning hit the ground, blinding and deafening him for several moments. He opened his eyes to find himself laying on the ground. His back and head hurt and he was finding the ground oddly comfortable. He wondered if his Susanoo would stay active if he slept now, knowing he would probably if it didn't. Unable to find the will to truly care, his eyes closed, and darkness closed in on him. Break. Sasuke opened his eyes, not seeing the red clouds and lightning of the sky, but instead seeing a strange ceiling. It was jagged and clearly made of some sort of stone. You are awake, good, a voice said. He turned over and saw a man kneeling next to him, wringing out a cloth into a bowl of water. The man moved over with the cloth. Relax. You are safe for now. Safe in the ruins of your ancestors, he said, dabbing the cloth on Sasuke's forehead. The dust is your lungs almost KU, as did the heat and other elements. Who are you? Where are we? Sasuke asked. As I said, in the ruins, the man said before placing the cloth back into the bowl and then lifting a cup up to Sasuke. He helped him sit up and drink from the cup. Thank you, Sasuke said as he laid back down. Now then, as for who I am. He turned back to Sasuke and let his eyes transform into a twisted Sharingan. I am the leader of the Uchiha. The ones that remain out here anyways. But, how have the Uchiha survived out here? All in good time. For now you should be awake enough to at least stand, the man said as he stood up and offered Sasuke a hand. Sasuke took the hand and slowly stood up, ready to know what was going on. Once on his feet he looked around and noticed that the whole room was made of the same stone as the ceiling above. The man led Sasuke out of the room showing that they were in the middle of a large cave system. In the center were several trees surrounded with various crops. There were several people walking around and many more working in various tasks. Life has been difficult out here in the Badlands, but we have been able to eke out a living here, the man said. Why? Sasuke asked. Why not leave the Badlands and go to the elemental nations? And participate in your wars? No. Long ago our ancestors decided that we should stay and correct the mistake we made, rather than assist any with mistakes not our own. Some did not share that sentiment, feeling that the Badlands should be left as the Badlands, that our mistakes were easy enough to discard. But these aren't your mistakes. Nor was the feud between the original Uchiha and Senju. Yet the descendants fought all the same. Now as the ones at the end of the war decided to stay and fix their mistakes, now so do the descendants all the same. But now it might not matter. With everything going on back in the world, we might all be experiencing our last few days. You mean with Zetsu and the Juubi? The man nodded. I've spent generations trying to fix this mistake, and I might not even be able to finish in that endeavor. How do you know about some of this stuff? I mean, you even knew my name when I first woke up. Sasuke asked. Just because we live way out here doesn't mean we don't sometimes put our feelers out now and again to see what's going on. Especially in recent years. I see. Another thing that's been bothering me, what did you mean by generations? Sasuke asked. You remember those immortals? I somewhat remember them being mentioned by Naruto, but not really. Well, they aren't really rare. At least a few show up every couple decades. I myself was there when the first Uzumaki founded Uzushio. A few of us here are immortal. Naruto said something about immortals having varying degrees of B-lust to make up for the absence of their own death. That is true, but out here, the few of us there are learned to keep it in check. There is no way that we could fulfill our duty alone. Our honor and duty has helped us maintain focus. So, what about now? Certainly you could help back in the world to save it from Zetsu. I'm afraid we wouldn't make much difference. We didn't in the last wars our people took part in. We won't now. But, you might if you were to return from exile. Return from my exile. The man waved his hand for Sasuke to follow him as he moved down a cave split off. That's right. If you return, your power could help turn the tide. While our own power has somewhat shriveled in these past generations, your power has only grown. Compared to Madara, you are still relatively small, but by no means of the imagination does that mean you can't make a difference in this coming battle. That's true, but I've been exiled. Naruto's power has far surpassed my own, and if he wanted he could easily crush me, even in the midst of a war. He exiled me knowing I would out here. If I were to return, he would accept your return if for no other reason than to use you as a lamb to the to distract his enemies. I know enough of him that he will not attack you. He realizes that you are more valuable to him alive in this situation and will exploit you to the fullest. And what do you think would happen if I survived to the end of the war? If you survived, he wouldn't bother letting you return to exile. At the end of the war, then he would kill you. Break. Obito kept fighting, burning through each enemy he could and even sending some of them into Kamui or the bottom of the ocean. Things were going well and they were starting to gain some ground before a dark figure suddenly appeared. That figure ran up before he could react and reached forward. There was suddenly a burning pain where his eyes were supposed to be. Break. Akira's black armor surrounded him, giving off an ominous red glow through the seams in the plating. His sword, as black and ominous as his armor, moved with fluid ease through each and every enemy, Zetsu or otherwise. As his arms were extended, a reanimated zombie tried to bring a war hammer down on his head. He lowered his body and felt the footsteps along his back as Angela ran up from behind and beheaded the zombie. After placing a ceiling tag, she turned to her old friend, throwing a kunai over his shoulder into the eye of a Zetsu. They then moved back to back in order to protect against several reanimated shinobi that attacked all at once. Akira braced and blocked the sword of an enemy before kicking them into the air and see them in half. However, another came at him before he could place a ceiling tag. Angela was having the same problem as each enemy she cleaved into kept coming back every time she couldn't seal them. "Where is Mikasa?" Akira shouted. "I lost track of her," Angela said. "But she could be of some real help right now." Another went in to attack them before it was shredded, apart along with each of the others. A chain whipped around as Meizu and Gozu landed next to them. "You didn't forget about us, did you?" Meizu asked. "Not a chance of that," Akira said. "Thanks for the help." "No problem," Gozu replied. "Just don't S on us now, fearless leader. Now we need to hurry up and seal them." Agreed. Akira and Angela started sealing what the regenerating enemies, Meizu and Gozu working on taking out any encroaching Zetsu. Gozu ran forward, dodging between targets as his brother weaved in opposite directions, each working to entangle as many as possible within their quickly depleting length of chain. Having calculated the length, they landed next to each other just as their chain ran out. Meizu turned to his brother. Now, Gozu shouted. They twisted around using the mechanisms within the gauntlets to rapidly retract their chain and shred those wrapped inside it. Each Zetsu torn in half tried to cling to what life it had, though each fell silent. The zombies were another matter as several regenerated, even more unscathed and ready, quickly went on the offensive. "Where the hell is Mikasa?" Gozu asked to no one in particular. "Right here." Akira landed in front of the brothers, his armor spreading out just as a wave of white flames engulfed the area with a roar. Akira's armor held out as each of the surrounding opponents were incinerated. The moment the fire ebbed, Akira's armor retracted and revealed Mikasa standing on the back of a massive black dragon. "You mind not trying to K my friends, sister?" Akira said. Mikasa rested a hand on her hip. "I knew you would keep them from being K. Besides, I just saved your N. Try to be grateful, Akira," she said with a smirk. "On your left," Akira shouted, appearing next to her and Zetsu lunging at her. Mikasa laughed. Even, now try not to wander off again." Akira held his sword from the Zetsu and jumped back to the ground, swinging his sword in an arc that severed several arms and B. "Angela, to me," he shouted. Angela appeared from the smoke over the battlefield, jumping over him and bringing her broadsword crashing down. The massive blade see-through multiple opponents, from shoulder to they were split in half. Akira and Angela moved nearly back to back, the overwhelming number of enemies backed off somewhat. "Now," she shouted, outstretching an arm but keeping the other in a firm grip on her blade. Akira grabbed her wrist with a tight hold, pulling back and around with enough force to lift her off the ground and her sword out of the ground and B. The force of it carried her and her outstretched blade in an impossibly large arc that easily see down the front line of Zetsu and zombies. The arc ended with Angela landing on her feet at Akira's side. More moved in only for a jagged tail to crush them or be burned by Mikasa's dragon. "Devour them in your fire, old friend," Mikasa said as she pulled out two twin battle axes in each hand. The dragon did just that, spitting fire over large areas and using its tail to destroy others. Mikasa jumped of the dragon's back and easily began into several enemies at a time, the blades of her axes cleaving enemies into halves or other portions. A massive form then appeared and tried to crush the dragon, only for that dragon to light the mass on fire and dispelling it in smoke. From that smoke, Hanzo of the salamander flew out and tried to impale Mikasa with the blade of his kusarigama. Though Mikasa was prepared to handle it, Hanzo was suddenly swatted off to the side by a large, deep purple, ethereal, and skeletal hand. She looked over to see Sasuke standing there with his partial Susanoo activated. "What are you doing here?" Mikasa asked. "You were exiled. Are you going to complain?" Sasuke retorted. "You're all knee-deep in crap, you'll need all the help you can get. Now I'll cover the zombies. You burn those Zetsu. Break." Zetsu appeared in what remained of one of the central chambers of the cave. He looked up through the hole in the ceiling before looking at the bee on the ground. It was time to put the final phases into motion. He knelt next to the ceiling array and activated it, the black mass stretching forward and touched the body in the enter, forcing it to mold several hand seals. The last hand seal was formed and held there. The life left each of the bee as a large head pushed through the rubble and opened its maw to release a single green light. That light then plunged into Madara's sea. The cracks along his body began to heal, color returned to his skin, and his eyes turned to dust. The moment his body was fully alive, Madara walked over to the body in the center of the array and pulled his eyes out of the body that was laying there. He then pressed the eyes into his own sockets and blinked several times now that he had them again. It's rather late in the plan, Zetsu. Madara said. I can already feel that the war has begun. There were complications, but everything is now on track. Good. Now why are you still molded to my skin? That would be because he has deceived you, brother. Madara turned, surprised to see Izuna standing there. He has deceived and used you as he has our entire clan and the Senju clan since the time of the Sage of Six Paths. We are not meant to fulfill your plan. We were meant to fulfill his plan. What? Zetsu, is this true? Madara asked. Yes it is. I used you like the pawns you were meant to be. And now everything is almost at an end. You've almost outlived your usefulness. Though resisting, Madara formed the rib cage and arm of his Susanoo, moving with the attempt to his brother with its sword. The sword, however, was forced to the side as Izuna blocked it with the hand of his own, deep maroon Susanoo. Don't forget whose eyes my big brother has, Zetsu. Izuna said as his Susanoo formed another hand and swatted Madara away. Choosing to go for speed, Madara jumped back and tried to punch Izuna through the ribs of his Susanoo. Izuna replied in kind, matching Madara's fist with his own. Madara angled the force of his punch to force Izuna's downward along with a large portion of his upper body. As Izuna went downward, Madara sent an upward kick to his face. He blocked the kick with one arm before grabbing hold of the leg and standing up. He rapidly turned in a full circle, sending Madara flying into a wall. Pulling himself from the crater in the cave wall, Madara stood up. Good job, little brother, he ground out, trying to resist Zetsu's influence. On your left. Madara disappeared from view, appearing in the air ready to land a spinning kick to Izuna's head. Izuna rapidly moved, using a well-placed fist on Madara's knee to change momentum and send his brother face first into the ground. The older brother was quickly back up, jumping away and moving through hand seals as he went. Kaiten, Dark Blaze. Madara held out his arm and spit out a line of fire that coiled around his arm and shot out towards Izuna, who jumped over the fire only for Madara to pull upward and hit his target anyways. Izuna grimaced as he was thrown into a section of remaining ceiling and then dropped. The moment his imprint was made in the ground, Izuna was back up and charged Madara, knocking the breath out of his lungs with his fists. He then grabbed his brother's arms and threw him over his head into a cave wall. Madara was lunging back, bringing a fist down on his brother only to get a fireball into his face. Izuna capped the fire going, but was surprised as Madara's Susanoo drove its sword through his sea, though the sword was different than its usual. The new sword seemed fluid. Izuna's body suddenly started being sucked away into the sword. I always hated this sword. Figures Zetsu would make me end this with it. Madara said. Yeah, it never fit your style. Izuna said before his body was sucked away into Madara's Totsuka blade. Mada then landed as the dust settled. He then pulled out the small tube with Obito's eyes. Enough talking and distractions. Time to proceed with the plan. Zetsu said before several wood clones formed. Go get the Jinchuriki. I'll get the statue. Break. Shino was having massive amounts of trouble, being forced to rely on using kunai to avoid the Zetsu obtaining his chakra. He was eventually forced to fall back, but used his insects in more creative ways. Some of those ways were to have them eat away at the ground to trap the Zetsu in pits or lift large segments of stone and drop them on enemies. He moved to another Zetsu in the eye but stopped moving, as did each Zetsu and zombie, when the ground suddenly cracked and there was a massive release of pressure. With a monstrous and ear-shattering roar, a Anik hand reached out of the ground and hefted up an even larger body. The body looked mostly like an emaciated humanoid with a twisted end and elongated limbs. It lifted itself onto its legs as its 10 tails furled out behind it. It then looked over the battlefield and roared again, ready to destroy all it saw. Madara stood on top of its head, hating that what he had dreamed of for so long was being turned against him. He had long dreamed of standing her on top of the Juubi at the end of the plan. And now that he knew he had been used for someone else's work, all he felt was a bitter taste. All that's left is for the beast to fully mature, Madara. And then you will be its host. Then your purpose will be complete and my mother will finally return. Break. Naruto appeared in the battle-torn wasteland in a flash, his sons and Kichigai next to him. He tossed Skull to the ground and let his limp body lay there. He looked around, displeased but not surprised to see the massive roots spread across the ground with thousands of people hanging from them. His interest was especially piqued to see Sasuke laying on the ground with bees seeping from one eye and slightly burned, but otherwise, merely unconscious. And then he looked to the source of all this chaos. Kaguya Otsutsuki standing there in front of the tree, Black Zetsu clinging to her sleeve. Skull's body twitched and his head turned to stare forward and see what had been wrought upon the world through his efforts. And then, regardless of the pain it caused him, regardless of the brain damage, he smiled. Yes, Skull rasped out. Welcome back to the world, my beloved. Your most faithful Takizawa has seen to it that you have been revived. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.